ReviewTyme is the home for all things theme parks. Stay up to date with our content by subscribing and turning on notifications. A decade before Walt Disney Studios Park opened, the Euro Disneyland Resort debuted as perhaps the most beautiful, immaculately detailed, and fully imagined Magic Kingdom-style resort ever built, and it was an absolute disaster. It opened in 1992 to poor reception, and by 1994, with $3 billion of debt, the Walt Disney Company threatened to simply close the resort and leave the banks with the land. With 6 hotels, a single theme park, and a master plan that would rival the likes of Walt Disney World, the resort was overextended, underattended, and properly rear-ended by the poor critical reception from the European market. Things weren't looking good for the resort, but they had a possible ace up their sleeve. Before Euro Disneyland had even opened, Disney had teased and announced a second theme park for the Euro Disney Resort that would open in 1996, just 4 years after Euro Disneyland would open. The glitz and glamour of Hollywood was about to call Paris home with the announcement of Disney-MGM Studios Europe. Would this be a turning point for the Euro Disney Resort? Would this park redeem Disney in the eyes of the European theme park guests? And would Disney learn from their many mistakes of pinching too many pennies? No.
Ta-da!
Disney-MGM Studios did absolutely nothing for the Disneyland Paris resort. It eventually opened 6 years late in 2002 purely to fulfill a contractual agreement. Some would even say that the resort was worse off for having it, and 2 decades down the line, Disney would need to pay over €2 billion in new additions and refurbishments to stop it from being genuinely rubbish. Uninspired and lacking Disney's signature touch, the feedback was eerily similar to Disney's California Adventure Park, which opened just a year prior. It was a mistake beyond comprehension, and one that never should have happened. But it wasn't always like this. Disney-MGM Studios Europe was expected to be a much different park that was riding off the optimism of its sister location at Walt Disney World in Orlando. Today, Disney's Hollywood studio at Walt Disney World is neither in Hollywood, nor is it a studio, and it's just barely a Disney's. Though originally, when it opened in 1989 as Disney-MGM Studios, the park was a fully functioning film studio designed to be the Hollywood of the East Coast, so the name made a lot more sense. The theme park was a fresh new idea for the company, but more importantly, it was cheap. Slap down a few sound stages, throw some attractions inside, and suddenly every cut corner was a behind-the-scenes look at movie magic. Unlike Epcot, which would only ever work as a one-time theme park, Disney finally had a theme that was as mass-producible as the Magic Kingdom style of parks. But it didn't come without its problems. Disney-MGM Studios in Orlando opened with very few attractions, but as a caveat, the park offered a 2-hour tram tour that took you around the functioning film studio. Designed to be a staple of these studio-style parks, this wholly original idea that was absolutely not inspired by the Universal Studios tram tour in Hollywood was largely well received. But as time went on, a major problem began to emerge. Nobody wanted to film at Disney-MGM Studios. Not only was a theme park not an attractive place to produce a motion picture, considering their proximity to guests, but the location just wasn't enticing either. Hollywood had the production companies, actors, crews, and government incentives, whilst Florida had swamps and alligators. Even Disney weren't all that interested in filming at Disney-MGM Studios, only filming 3 motion pictures on location. But they did found Walt Disney Animation Studios Florida here that eventually brought us Mulan, Lilo and Stitch, and Brother Bear. The tram tour had some stage show elements and gave a glimpse into the inner workings of the studio and theme park, but without recognizable movies and shows being filmed on location, it became increasingly superficial and a little sad, considering that the park basically begged you to imagine what it'd be like if actual movies were filmed there. Without the tram tour working its movie magic to gobble up guest time, MGM Studios quickly became recognized as a dreaded half-day theme park with very limited offerings. Using what they had learned with their Orlando park, Disney announced some of the details regarding the slated European 1996 park. Instead of entering through a sprawling open-air Hollywood boulevard, the opening land would instead be contained entirely within a soundstage featuring vibrant neon lights and the entrance to the French version of the Great Movie Ride, a dark ride through the world of movies. Scattered around the rest of the park were attractions that would only come to Orlando later. This included Honey, I Shrunk the Kids movie set adventure, animation exhibits, the sci-fi dine-in theater, and a Dick Tracy gangster shootout attraction that was in the works for Orlando, which would surprisingly become Tower of Terror. The Tram tour would make a return, but this time as a simplified attraction that no longer relied on a functioning backstage. But what that would be was any person's guess. 1996 came and went, but Disney-MGM Studios Europe was nowhere to be found. That's largely in part because the crowds that Disney was expecting at Euro Disneyland were nowhere to be found. Nobody predicted Euro Disneyland would be a failure. Financiers predicted that the European location would be a lucrative venture for the company, and Disney went all in on the project. To handle the expected demand, the resort opened with 6 hotels and a master plan designed to accommodate for enormous crowds, as the resort's popularity would eventually wane over time and they would add more to pick it back up. But they had flown too close to the sun. In a state of panic after the failed opening, Michael Eisner, CEO of the Walt Disney Company at the time, went into crisis control. All major theme park expansions within the pipeline anywhere in the world were shuttered, including Disney-MGM Studios Europe. Budgets were slashed and staff were let go. Disney's theme parks were approaching the turning millennia, whilst running on empty. To make matters worse, in 1994, Disney's president and Michael Eisner's right-hand man, Frank Wells, unexpectedly died in a tragic helicopter accident. Frank Wells was to Eisner what Roy was to Walt, and after his passing, Eisner doubled down on his budget-cutting efforts. Imagination and creativity were no longer the founding principles of Disney theme parks, as Imagineers were exiled to be replaced by retail executives, accountants, and financiers who believed they could turn a penny into a dollar. In essence, they were exploiting the Disney brand instead of utilizing it. 1995 would be the first year that Euro Disneyland would turn a profit, partly due to the opening of the $100 million re-envisioned Space Mountain in Discoveryland, and the resort's name being officially changed to Disneyland Paris. With financials turned around, Disney went into full swing with their investments and opened theme parks at an alarming rate. Animal Kingdom, Disney's California Adventure Park, and Disney-MGM Studios Europe all opened within a few years of each other, with each being received more poorly than the last. Disney-MGM Studios Europe opened on March 16, 2002, but it was now known as Walt Disney Studios Park and was reminiscent of the park announced almost a decade earlier. But worse, much worse. Disney had postponed the project for too long, and they were out of money, but more importantly, they were out of ideas. But as part of their agreement for building the Disneyland Paris resort, Disney were contractually obligated to add a new park to the resort around every decade. Their time was up, and it was either make a park with what resources they had, or face the consequences. But hey, it was a studio park. What's the worst that could happen? Oh no. From a distance, the park was recognized by 2 prominent distinguishing features. The first was an elegant studio arch reminiscent of the Hollywood elites during their heyday, and the other was the Eiffel Tower, a 163 feet tall water tower with gigantic Mickey ears on it. It was from this distance that the park looked rather enticing. Sure, it had 3 rides and was built over only 25 acres of land, but from the outside it looked pretty good. Even upon entering, you were greeted to a beautiful, well-presented plaza with a fountain centerpiece celebrating the famous Sorcerer Mickey scene from Fantasia, flanked by gardens and Studio One serving as a grand Art Deco backdrop, which upon entering would be the first real land for the park. But just like Hollywood, it was all a lie. It was inside Studio One that you were introduced to the true Walt Disney Studios park. Disney had recycled their concept for an entirely indoors Hollywood boulevard, but this time around they went less for a romanticized historic reimagining and more for what you'd expect at a high school's Hollywood-themed pantomime. The sets were flat, cartoonish, and offensively vibrant in their presentation, and they really wanted you to know that this was all fake, with exposed lighting, catwalks, and two-dimensional flats, but hey, this was Hollywood. You're getting a glimpse at movie magic. But that's where the first real mistake comes into play. Movie magic is exciting, but only when you have something to directly compare it to. Seeing behind the scenes of your favorite movies gives you an appreciation for the art, and it shows how with the right lighting, camera techniques, and planning, they can turn something less into something more. But movie sets without context are just something less. They're not exciting because we have nothing to base our excitement on, and it's like being shown how a magic trick works before being provided the opportunity to experience the feeling of wonder from the original trick. But I digress. Studio One just set the scene. Surely the rest of the park wasn't like this, right? Well, let's just say that the best theme parks don't usually begin their construction story by being a contractually agreed necessity. Once you emerge from the building, you were immediately thrown into the park's hub area, and any illusion that this was actually going to be a decent experience was thrown out the two-dimensional window. From here you had the option to either go left, right, or forward. Some may even go backwards out of the park. But if you thought that from those locations the park would branch out into other areas, you would be sorely disappointed. You could literally see the entire theme park from here, over its 25 glorious acres. Walt Disney Studios Park was absolutely pathetic in size, being barely larger than some of the lands at the neighbouring Disneyland park. But it's not how big it is, it's how you use it. And that was also rather pathetic. The park was split into 4 lands. You entered through Front Lot, the hub area was the Production Courtyard, to the right was Animation Courtyard, and at the back was the aptly named Backlot. But there was nothing really to tell these lands apart. They were all just a part of the studio and had the same industrious, bland feel about them, and each seemed to be more a celebration of the wonders of concrete than movie magic. Production Courtyard contained 2 attractions. The first is a stage show contained within Studio 2 called Cinemagic. This stage show featured a cast member disguised as a guest getting trapped within many famous movie moments such as The Wizard of Oz, The Exorcist, Monsters Inc. and Star Wars. The show was well regarded as a European reimagining of the great movie ride in stage form, and became a fan favourite for the guests that visited. The other attraction was Studio Tram Tour, Behind the Magic, which would take you around the bustling Walt Disney Studios park, with the only problem being that the park wasn't actually a studio, and never intended on being a studio, which begs the question, why on earth is there a Studio Tram Tour? Well, instead of taking you around a real movie studio, the tram tour took you around a simulated studio, with props, cameras, and equipment scattered around the experience alongside 2 major encounters that would use special effects to show you what might happen on an actual live set. The first encounter was Catastrophe Canyon, which was borrowed from Disney-MGM in Orlando, and the other was based around the largely forgotten film Reign of Fire, which displayed a set of London being burnt to the ground, something I'm sure some French took strange solace in. Somehow Disney didn't learn from their past with Disney-MGM Studios in Orlando, and decided to just build the tram tour anyway, even after all the problems they had with it in its history. Once again, just like the entrance of Studio One, the experience felt hollow and empty because there was no context. You were just seeing neat special effects and sitting down for a little while. It was a one and done experience, and Disney should have known from this from their sister location. But that was Production Courtyard. On to Animation Courtyard, which contained 3 more attractions. Featured within Studio 3 was Cinemagic, another live show which showed Donald carelessly opening the Disney Vault, with many animation favorites then coming alive on stage through puppets, costumed characters, and backlight effects. Also featured in the land was the Art of Disney Animation, which contained no actual animators, but did have the Animation Academy where you could pretend for a brief moment that you were an animator yourself, until many saw their own horrific Picasso renditions of famous Disney intellectual property. The final attraction for the land was Flying Carpets over Agrabah, which was basically Dumbo, but instead of a scenic tour over Fantasyland, you had a beautiful vista of concrete on a flat painted wall, whilst you were screamed at by Dan Castellaneta as the genie as he directed the famous Whole New World scene. Next up is Backlight, where it doesn't even bother hiding that everyone just gave up at this point. Nothing screams Disney theme park quite like sprawling unthemed concrete and an industrial sterile setting. It contains 3 more attractions, with the most prominent unsurprisingly being Rock and Roller Coaster. Whilst the facade looks like early 90s video game box art, even prominently featuring a gigantic CD for no apparent reason, surprisingly the coaster inside is well presented and fun. The launch is satisfying, and the dazzling sights and sounds echoing a rock concert make for an enjoyable experience. The 2 other attractions in the Backlight were both shows, with the first being Motor's Action Stunt Show Spectacular, which was a Motor's Action Stunt Show Spectacular, and Armageddon, which put you standing on a live set within space as the hostile environment began falling apart, spewing fireballs, sparks, and steam in your face, which would no longer be considered COVID-friendly. Some may argue that the theme of Backlight is technically good because it's designed to look bad, but a bad theme idea does not make it good in execution. But it was obvious that it wasn't just Backlight that was suffering. The whole park was uninspired, lifeless, and flawed. It didn't cater to thrill seekers, and it didn't cater to families. Disney now had another Disney's California Adventure Park on their hands, and the park's addition did nothing for the struggling Disneyland Paris resort. And it's not like Disney just forgot how to design theme parks. Just 6 months earlier, the Tokyo Disney Resort opened Tokyo Disney Sea, which is regarded as the best theme park in the world to this day. Disney weren't being careful. They were being stubborn by purposefully clipping their own wings before they could even get off the ground, in the pursuit of riding off the established Disney brand for a little bit of extra coin. But to make money, you have to spend money. Once Bob Iger took over from Michael Eisner as CEO of the Disney company in 2005, it became apparent that this park needed help, and only an exorbitant amount of money would fix that. For 5 years, the park went untouched until in 2007, a new expansion opened called Toon Studio. This included Crush's Coaster, a custom indoor spinning roller coaster, as well as what was essentially a Cars-themed Teacups attraction. These additions broadened the appeal for families, and any ride was a welcome addition to bolster the lineup. In December of the same year, the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror opened for guests, and the park suddenly had a desirable weenie to entice people inside. Coincident with the opening of Toy Story 3, in August of 2010 the park opened Toy Story Playland, which shrunk guests down to the size of a toy and added 3 new flat rides, including a half-pipe roller coaster. In 2014, Ratatouille the Adventure opened as the park's first fully featured dark ride, in a new land that was a romanticized look at downtown Paris. The attraction was praised for raising the bar in both ride and scenic quality, with its beautiful setting and the use of trackless dark ride technology. The well-balanced offerings now provided something for everyone. But the park still had major problems, especially in regards to its size. and many of the remnants of the original Walt Disney Studio Park just being generally rubbish. To rectify this problem in 2018, Bob Iger announced a multi-year phased expansion for Walt Disney Studios Park that would completely transform the mismatched experience into one cohesive and competent theme park. Opening in phases from 2021 to 2025 to coincide with the 2024 Summer Olympics in Paris, the €2 billion expansion, or $2.5 billion USD, would feature a recreation of Arendelle from Frozen, and a smaller iteration of Batuu from Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, all featured around a man-made lake in the location of where the Tram tour used to reside. The Backlight would also finally be put out of its misery, as it would become the Avengers campus, and Rock and Roller Coaster would be completely rethemed to Iron Man to accommodate the new land. It seems that finally, after almost 2 decades and €2 billion, Walt Disney Studios Park won't be an embarrassment on the Disney Parks lineup. I also want to mention that I don't make these retrospectives to criticize your enjoyment of these parks. If you had a great time, then I'm genuinely glad you did. But I'm critical of them because we're going into a scary time with the world the way it is, and we need to be sure that Disney remembers these parks' shortcomings, so that history doesn't repeat itself. Until we find out, I'm Dominic from ReviewTyme. Thanks for watching.